Okay, so Kitisa is a bit of a dramatic parsha. Not at the beginning, admittedly. Beginning, not so dramatic. Beginning is the counting of the Machta Shekel and the like. But the central story of the parsha, maybe not a good story, but a dramatic one, is the story of the Egel. The sin of the Egel, what leads up to the Egel, the actual sin of the Egel, God's declaration that he's going to destroy the Jewish people, Moshe's defense, and Moshe's progressive argumentation to God to not just forgive them, but to rebuild the relationship, in convincing God to create a relationship predicated on the Yud Gimel Midot Harachamim. And then Moshe pushing farther and saying, I don't only want that, I want you to commit to lead us into Eretz Yisrael yourself and not through a messenger. It's a very dramatic parsha at many levels. But what I want to do is focus not so much on the parsha directly, because we do know the basic story, but I want to highlight how unique the role that Moshe Rabbeinu takes in this parsha is, by way of contrasting it with the story that surrounds the Haftarah. The Haftarah is from Malachim, Aleph, and it is part, depending on whether you have the Ashkenazi minhag or the Sephardi minhag. We have different lengths, different components of this story, but it's part of the larger story of Eliyahu. And the stories of Eliyahu and Moshe in general, and specifically this moment of Moshe's life, are very, very parallel. Moshe and Eliyahu both have revelation of God, but not just revelation of God. That's not so impressive. But they both have revelation of God actually at the same place, which is at Har Sinai. Right? Eliyahu is sent to Chorev. And the similarities don't end there. Moshe, when he goes up to Har Sinai, doesn't eat for 40 days. Eliyahu, when he is told by God to go to Chorev, he does eat, but only at the beginning of his journey, and he's given food by the Malach that is then supposed to last him the entirety of the 40-day journey. Right, so both of them don't eat for the duration of 40 days. Right? Moshe, we don't hear about him eating at all. Eliyahu eats before his 40-day journey, but that is supposed to let him. It's a different miracle, right? Moshe just doesn't need food. Eliyahu has miraculously slowed digestion or something along those lines, but basically he doesn't eat for 40 days on his approach to Har Chorev, to Har Sinai. And both Nevi'im face a moment, in fact, this moment, where they are at Har Sinai arguing with God in the aftermath of, really two incidents, both a public sin and a public commitment to God. Right? Moshe obviously faces the situation of the Egel in the aftermath of this is the swing of these parshiot in the aftermath of Revelation, of Naseh v'Nishma, and the Jews committing themselves to God. Eliyahu, when he approaches Har Chorev, he is coming on the aftermath of a 3-year drought that he had decreed on the Jewish people because of the mass idolatry, because the king of Israel at the time, Achav, had increased the amount of idolatry, as the Navi says, more than anyone who had preceded him, because until the time of Achav, the Jews had, even if they had idols, they were mostly syncretists, meaning they worshipped God, right? Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hashem, and idols. And usually it was, you hear about one or two gods, right? Usually Baal, right? Usually the rain god. If you have a god, but it's not even clear that there was Avodah Zarah in Yisrael at the time. They had the Agalim, which Yeravam had built, but the Rishonim debate whether the Agalim that Yeravam built were actually idols at all, or they were meant to be a replacement for the Beit HaMikdash, in which case they were just illicit statues. Again, similar question that we have by the Egel, it's Avodah Zarah or just an illicit intermediary. But Achav, it's unquestionable. Achav marries Izebel, who is a princess she brings of a foreign nation and brings the idols of the Tzidonim, of the Plishtim, of the Phoenicians, and she brings in the idols from the area and wages a war against, doesn't just add idolatry to the pantheon, but actually wages a war against God, and kills all the Nevi'im, kills all the prophets of God, those that are not hidden, at least by Ovadia, in the cave. So you have sort of this mass idolatry going on, this national idolatry. But then in the famous showdown of Eliyahu at Har Carmel, after the 3 years, when he finally brings rain, he mocks the prophets of the Baal. He challenges them to a test and says, we're going to see whether you can bring rain or I can bring rain. And they daven to their gods. Nothing happens, He tells them, yell louder. Maybe they can't hear you. Maybe they're napping, And then at the very last moment, when it's his turn, he takes the Mizbeach, he douses it in water. And while it's doused in water, he asks God to send down a flame from heaven, brings down a flame, brings his carbon, and then the rain comes, and everyone says, Hashem hu Elokim, Hashem hu Elokim, God is the only one, and the Jews commit to listening to God, and you think it's all good, and then they all revert to the same idolatry that they had been serving previously. So both Moshe and Eliyahu also face these national moments of commitment to God, which are immediately followed by a reversion to idolatry. And the Midrashim pick up on this. And the Rishonim pick up on this, It's hard to miss the Eliyahu-Moshe parallels, It's quite hard, It goes on. Meaning Moshe reaches Har Sinai the first time when he's in Midian, Where he gets there the first time at the burning bush. And he gets there because he was chased by Paro because he had killed somebody. Which is how Eliyahu ends up here, because he has to flee from Achav, because Achav is going to kill him because he killed somebody. Their stories are very parallel. But you cannot miss again, there's a reason this Haftarah is chosen on this week's Parsha, because the stories are quite parallel. But the big question that everyone wants to know is, what do you make of these parallels? It's very nice to just sort of go point for point and say, hey, Moshe is really like Eliyahu. Eliyahu is really like Moshe. In the same place. The Bavli goes farther. The Bavli says not only do they both end up in Har Sinai, but the revelation that Eliyahu has at Har Sinai is actually in the same cave where Moshe had his revelation in Kitisa. The Chazal take this to the nth degree. But what do you make of it? So there is one school of thought that just said, and this is basically the Radak, who says, look, what you make of this is that Eliyahu is an amazing prophet, because Moshe is right up there, He is number one, undeniably. This is a tenet of faith, that he is number one, never to be replaced in the list of prophets. But Eliyahu is a close, second, but he's... He's basically, It's like him and Shmuel are up there, Shmuel is the other person who is very Moshe-like, as we know, Moshe, Aaron, he is equated with Moshe and Aaron at different times. But basically in our top 5, Moshe is going to be number 1. And then Shmuel and Eliyahu are probably going to be up there. So that's basically what the Radak says. The message of this whole thing is that Eliyahu is Moshe-like. But Chazal, in many Midrashim, and this is played out by many of the Rishonim and Achronim, you look at the Alshech, he has a long piece on this, you look at the Malbim, he has a long piece on this, they take it completely differently. And they say the point of these parallels is not just to compare Moshe and Eliyahu. It's true, at some level it's to compare Moshe and Eliyahu. Eliyahu is a great prophet, no denying that. But it's to highlight the uniqueness of Moshe and to criticize Eliyahu. Because while all these parallels are clear, the difference that happens at this critical moment is very different. Because Moshe for all of this, having been the person who spoke to God face to face, being the person that you expect to stand up for God. Right? He is God's, and throughout Tanakh, throughout Chumash, that's really what he does. Right? He stands up for God to Paro. He stands up for God, right? Always. Right? Every time the Jews complain, he's standing up for God. When push comes to shove, and God says, "Go back to your people, because they've sinned, and I'm going to destroy them, and I'm going to make a new nation out of you, and you're going to do it right this time. I'm going to reset it." At that critical moment, Moshe says, "Absolutely not. Right? I am not going anywhere until you forgive them." He stands up for the Jewish people, and despite everything, right, even when there is nothing to say, right, there's nothing to say, right? This is one of the, right, I say this word often, but there is nothing to say, right? So much so is there nothing to say that in Kitisa, when this happens, right, Hashem says to Moshe, Lech reid ki shichet amcha asher litem eretz Mitzrayim saru maher min haderech, etc., etc. And then in pasuk Tet there you get Vayomer Hashem and Moshe. Right, you get Vayomer a second time. Why do you get Vayomer a second time? Moshe hasn't spoken in the middle. Right? So what does the pasuk do? Whenever it has a double Vayomer with no one speaking in the middle, it's highlighting that there was a response, and the response was silence. There was nothing for Moshe to say. The only reason he speaks in the second time around is because God gives him the opening, which is Hanichali, is leave me alone and I'll destroy them. At which point he realizes, if I leave them alone, if I leave God alone, he'll destroy them, which means if I don't leave him alone, he won't destroy them. But when there's nothing to say, Moshe comes up with a defense, and he says, they don't deserve it, but too bad. Because you tied your legacy to them, and if you destroy them, people aren't going to say they were evil, they're going to say you're weak. So you've put yourself in a corner, and it's really too bad. I'm really sorry, God, but you don't have any choice in this. And if you don't listen to this, you think that your way out is that you'll still have a Jewish people. They'll just be the children of me. So God says, no, I'm going to cut that option out of the equation by saying, if you kill them, kill me too. Now you have nothing left. You need them for your legacy, and I'm not an option. Right? So when push comes to shove, Moshe, for all that he's the greatest prophet and he represents God, he says to Hashem, but too bad. Right? I stand up for them even against you. And Eliyahu is the opposite. Because according to Chazal, the 3-year drought that had just ended was not instigated by God. It was not Eliyahu channeling God. It was Eliyahu forcing God's hand. It was Eliyahu saying, I've had it. I can't stand watching this idolatry. And they have a whole backstory where in the Midrash, Achav says to Eliyahu, someone had just died because he'd rebuilt Jericho, which had, based on the curse of Yoshua, and he says, Yoshua is clearly not as great as Moshe, because Yoshua said anyone who builds Jericho, his children will die, and that's what happened. Moshe in the Torah says that if you worship idolatry, bad things will happen to you, and I worship idolatry all the time, and I am powerful, and everything is good, and I have reign and wealth and political power. And Eliyahu says, that's it. I've had it. Right? There will be no rain until I say so. Right? And the Midrash goes farther, that it only rains because later on Eliyahu wants to save the child, and God says to him, look, I have 3 keys that I usually keep for myself. One is rain, one is Tchias HaMesim, and one is childbirth. A human being can only have one at a time. So if you want to bring the kid back to life, I'll give you the key of Tchias HaMesim, but you've got to give me back the key of rain. Right? But Chazal, over and over, say Eliyahu doesn't stand up for the Jewish people. In fact, when God isn't punishing them, Eliyahu steps in and says, I will punish. I will be more for God than God is himself. And then he gets to Chorev, and there's the famous scene. There is the storm and the fire and and each time, what does the pasuk say? Lo birash Hashem. God isn't in the storm. He isn't He's in the still thin voice. He's in the quiet. And every time God comes to Eliyahu and says, Malecha po Eliyahu, what are you doing here? And Eliyahu says to him, Kano kineti lashem, I was zealous for you. And then it happens again. And God asks him again, what are you doing here? And again he says, I was zealous for you. And after a few times, God says to him, you're fired. Right? You're fired. Right? Go appoint a new Navi. Go appoint Elisha. Right? You're done. Your job is over. And the way the Midrash, the way Chazal see it, is that God said, I don't need a kanoi. I don't need you. And the way the Malbim says it is, the place of the Navi is not here on a mountaintop with me. If the Jews are sinning, your place is with the people. Go and change it. If the only thing you can say is Kano kineti, that I am zealous, then you're fired. Find someone else who will stand up for the people. I don't need you to stand up for me. I can stand up for myself. I need someone who will stand up and help the people. And that's how the Midrash sees the parallels. Not simply Eliyahu is a great Navi. He is. But it's to highlight the difference between Moshe and Eliyahu. That Moshe, as much as he stands for God, God values the fact that he stands up for the Jewish people no matter what they do. And Eliyahu may have had the potential to be Moshe. He had the same revelation of Moshe in the same place, with the same back history. But he got there because he said, I have enough. They're worshiping too much idols. God punish them. And God says, Malecha po Eliyahu. What are you doing here? I get it. You're passionate for me. I appreciate it. Really, I do. But why are you here? Lo birash Hashem. That's not where I really am. I'm bekold mamadaka. Yeah. There's all those promises in the Torah that if you worship idols, bad things will happen. But I don't jump to punish my people. Why are you more zealous for me than I am? And if you can't get that, you can't come to the place of Moshe, you can't stand in the exact same spot, in the same cave where Moshe, when he had nothing to say, davened to me, and I gave him the tools, I gave him the Yugin Milmida Rachamim, I taught him the secret, that I don't want to punish my people. I want a Navi who will be there and will defend them when there's nothing to say, and if someone stands up for them, I will listen. If you can't stand in Moshe's place, and you can't internalize it, and you can't realize, Lo birash Hashem, that I'm really in the still voice and not in the storm, then you're fired. Go find someone else. Go find someone else who will do what I need them to do. And therefore the Midrashim say that's why the two stories are parallel. Not just to highlight the similarities, but to tell you how unique Moshe was. That he could stand up, because it's very hard, right? If you are a Navi and you stand up for God, it's very hard to watch God's name trampled. To be Moshe, to stand up for God and for the Jewish people, even when those contradict, is a challenge. One that even Eliyahu couldn't stand up to, and that's why God fires him. But the Midrashim say that's why those stories are parallel. That's why this is part of the Haftarah, to remind us the uniqueness of Moshe and why forever he is the top Navi, not just because of the relationship with God, but the fact that despite he was that close with God, he could stand up for us even if it meant challenging that same being he spoke to panim el panim. And that's what the Haftarah comes, not just to compare, but to contrast and emphasize the uniqueness of Moshe Rabbeinu. So with that, good Shabbos.